Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we're releasing somewhat of a special episode where I am the host and I am also the guest. Um, if you've been listening to this show for a while, you know that I do not do solo shows. Sometimes we will do different shows where we combine a lot of like different episodes together and I kind of interject my opinions and that kind of thing. I've never done a solo episode straight all the way through. This is the very first one, so apologies in advance if this super sucks. More used to doing interview style, obviously. So the reason I wanted to record this solo cast is in response to an interview that I did recently where I interviewed Phoebe Lapine, who is the author of CARBIVORE, a very different kind of approach for us on our show. So I wanted to provide kind of a bit of a response to some of the things that we talked about in that episode, things that I had been thinking about and had been thinking about asking her and ultimately decided against asking her. So I'm going to explain all of that, and then I'm going to go through a few key points that I thought everybody should know. Again, just to provide a little bit of context and some, I don't know, just again, more like context to that particular episode. So I'm going to start out by kind of reading part of the introduction that I provided for Phoebe. Phoebe Lapine is a Brooklyn-based chef and author of 4 books and is the founder of Feed Me Phoebe, an award-winning lifestyle and recipe blog. On a personal note, Phoebe is an advocate for autoimmune disease and finding food freedom despite chronic illness. She had been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease known as Hashimoto's thyroiditis and learned that she was very sensitive to gluten. This was pivotal in helping her develop an outlook on wellness, what she calls healthy hedonism, that sweet spot where the things that nourish your body overlap with the things that feed your spirit. Her most recent book, CARBIVORE, 130 recipes, healthy recipes, to stop fearing carbs and embrace the comfort foods you love, is a culinary and dietary roadmap for making a carb-inclusive diet part of a healthy lifestyle and nutritious life. So that was the introduction for Phoebe. So let me kind of go back and tell you how this all unfolded. About a month prior to doing this episode with Phoebe, I got an email from the person that is booking her, Phoebe, for different interviews that she could be hosted on. And they reached out and said, hey, this is the author of CARBIVORE. We would love if you would host her on our show. This is what she does. This is what she writes about. Here's her recent book. And I wrote back and said, like I'm sure I can if you want me to, but just to be very, very clear, like we promote low carbohydrate diets in the space. My podcast interviews lots of fellow carnivores, people who do the carnivore diet where they're not eating any carbohydrates at all. I'm not really sure if this is like the right space for Phoebe. I don't want to put her in a spot that's a little bit awkward or difficult. And I got a response back fairly quickly from this person who is booking Phoebe. And she said, no, actually, the author thinks this would be a really good opportunity to have a nice chat, and we think it'll be good content. So at first, I was very surprised that they wanted to be hosted, even more surprised that after I explained kind of our approach and things that we do here, that they still wanted to be hosted, that Phoebe wanted to be on the show. So I thought about it more, and I wanted to host her and I wanted to hear her opinion. I also wanted to ask a bunch of questions and concerns that I personally had. And so I didn't know whether doing that interview, I always hesitate. I didn't know whether doing that interview would be authentic to the position that we take here at Boundless Body Radio, the things that we coach our clients on, if it would be fair to the audience to get a different perspective. And so what I decided to do is I decided to put a poll out on Twitter and said, hey, low carb people, carnivore people, I just got reached out to by the author of CARBIVORE. Would you like to hear an episode where a carnivore interviews a carbivore? And overwhelmingly, the response was over 90% yes, according to that Twitter poll that I put out. So again, I'm a little bit surprised about this, but if they want to be interviewed and people want to hear the interview, then I guess I'm going to do the interview. And we might have some differences of opinion, but I want to give that person space. I love to hear, again, different opinions and different views and things like that. So I thought it would be a nice kind of thing to go forward with to hear her experience. So we scheduled the interview. The day before we got the interview scheduled, I got reached out to again by the person who's setting up the podcast. Who just said, hey, the author Phoebe would like to do a discovery call before just to double check to make sure this is a really good fit. She's got some concerns about the carnivore community and the way they approach things. And she just wants to like talk things out to make sure she's not going to get like completely what's the word? Like just put in a really awkward position somebody that's arguing with her or trying to debate with her. And I had always said, like, look, I'm not looking for a debate. That's not who I am. There's other people out there that do debates really, really well. I'm not. I'm way too agreeable to a fault to want to kind of argue with somebody. So I agreed to the discovery call. The discovery call went great. Met Phoebe, wonderful person, really, really nice. It was great to chat with her. She kind of raised her concerns. They were along those lines. And I told her that I didn't want to do any kind of a debate. In fact, I had sent her a few days before the list of questions that I wanted to go through. I don't often do that. But I just wanted to go above and beyond for this particular episode to first of all show all the things that I agreed with as far as her content goes when somebody is consuming carbohydrates. And there was a very long list of things that I agreed with her on. And that list was the list of questions that populated that entire episode. So if you've heard the episode, all the things that I agreed with her on and found a lot of common ground made it onto that episode. And I also had a bunch of the questions of things that I wanted to ask her specifically about. They were questions about things specifically that I did not agree with her about. And I just wanted some justification. And so as we were talking about that, again, I had sent this list, to her in advance, several days in advance. So time to kind of review it and maybe, come up with things. I didn't want to ambush the person. They were all questions of things that were in her book anyway, things that she had written about. It became really clear to me early on, and Phoebe said this herself, so in her defense, that she is a bit more of a cookbook writer and is not obviously a medical professional. She has done some coaching with people, but only in a 4-week program, like she said. Like she told me, she does a lot of coaching with people with digestive issues, like SIBO. Her one of her 4 books is all about that. We talked about that in the interview as well, but it it was pretty obvious to me that her area of expertise, I do want to be really careful how I say this, her area of expertise was not necessarily in fine tooth combing through all of the research. And thus, I didn't feel like it would be productive or very fair to bring up some of my concerns with her during that chat. So, again, for right or for wrong, I decided that as we started that interview, I was just going to keep it to all of the things that I agreed with her on. Again, all of those questions made it onto the episode. And yeah, I just avoided asking her any of the other questions that I had, again, just to avoid kind of a debate or putting somebody in an awkward position. The interview was conducted. I thought it went really well. Really happy for Phoebe and really happy for the content that we created. One of the things I have to say is that for all the people that I coach on carnivore around the world, and for as long as I've been doing this and doing it myself, what I consider a carnivore diet is, again, 75% or greater animal of your calories coming from animal products is how I define a carnivore diet. I don't necessarily look at it as something very strict that everybody has to do all the time. But I also acknowledge that doing a carnivore diet is not that easy. And I really don't know tons of people who want to do it, can pull it off the way that I or others can. I think your suffering level has to be very high to be able to dedicate yourself to doing a carnivore diet. I certainly think it's worth it, and I wish more people would do it. But in a world where we do have lots of carbohydrates available to us, I appreciate Phoebe's work in the way that it presented a way to consume carbohydrates in a more kind of healthy way. So I really appreciated that, and I appreciated that we had common ground there. So again, you can go back and listen to the episode to hear us discuss everything. I'm just going to read through like a few of the things that she brought up where I definitely agreed with her. Right off the bat, she talks about how calories work in the body, and it's not necessarily calories in, calories out that's going to help most people with what they think they want, which is weight loss. She did mention that carbohydrates are obviously really delicious and we crave them, which I totally agree. She did make a point about carbohydrates that they are delicious and we're driven to want cake and fries, but they also are harmful for our health. And so her quote was, how do we ride that line? And I think that's a really valid point. And where we differ in opinions, I think, and abstaining from carbohydrates would be the best approach for a lot of people, where she takes the approach of more moderation. So again, just kind of keep that in mind. She talks a lot about how the low fat movement really failed us, which I totally agree with. When we shifted and started taking fat out of our diet because we thought it increased cholesterol, specifically saturated fat, increasing cholesterol, and that cholesterol making its way into our arteries and causing heart attacks, which has really never been proven. But that whole movement started, the low fat movement, and most popularized in the 80s and 90s with the food pyramid and Snackwell's generation, all that stuff we talked about in the episode as well. I think that was a total failure. We talked about hidden sugar everywhere. We talked about the Dorito effect, where food companies are combining the sweetest and the saltiest and the fattiest things all together that really hits the dopamine centers in our brain to help keep us addicted. She writes about that. She also mentioned in the book the fruit has been modified and is more available today than it is in the past. That's also very true. The fruits that you see in the grocery stores are huge. They're full of sugar. They have less nutrients and less fiber than they certainly used to. And you can buy those pretty much anywhere around the world, 365 days out of the year. So agreed with that as well. She did talk about insulin resistance, and talks about how a big of a problem that is when people are over consuming sugar in particular, way too many carbohydrates, and how that causes insulin resistance. I thought her explanation of that was really good. She did talk about continuous glucose monitors, how that can be helpful for people. She says in her book, quote, most people do well to halve H-A-L-V-E halve their carbohydrates, reduce their carbohydrates by half. That's something she acknowledged. And so I'm on board with that. Like if you're eating 300, 400 grams of carbohydrates a day, taking that down by half is a great move. And she acknowledges that. So I really appreciated that. She recommends in her book to choose savory foods over sweet foods. She has really great tips on how to go sugar-free, especially like temporarily to get away from the treats and the sugar and the candy and all that stuff, which again, I agreed on. She is definitely in favor of getting snacks out of the diet. She talks about how to prepare grains in a way that is a lot safer. She talks about resistant starch, how to make resistant starch when you cook and cool a carbohydrate. It becomes resistant. Like sushi rice would be a good example of this, where your body really is unable to kind of I guess like absorb a lot of the carbohydrate material when you cook and cool a carbohydrate. I was totally on board with that. I think that's a great strategy. She talked a lot about women's health, and I don't know if we touched on this as much in the episode. I can just say anecdotally, especially with women who are cycling, I do notice that women can modulate carbohydrates a lot more and a lot better, and that a strict carnivore diet may or may not work for all cycling women. There are people that are going to disagree with me on that, and I think that kind of really depends on how much fat a woman can intake. If I'm understanding the research correctly and what other people kind of talk about that, I think that can be a real challenge to get enough energy, especially from fat, if you are going to completely abstain from carbohydrates. And in that context, I do notice that women who are cycling do better doing some type of carb cycling. I think foods like, certain potatoes or white rice, I think is really benign. Some fruit I think is just fine. So again, we're going to have differences of opinion on every direction as far as that goes. That's just something anecdotally that I noticed, and she writes about that and talks about that. So those are things that we covered, and those are things that I am on board with. I agree with that. If you're not going to do a fully carnivorous diet, if you don't need to, if you want to include carbohydrates, I think that was a great list of things that you can do. And so we stuck to just that in the conversation. So I do have also this list here. I'm going to kind of go through these point by point. I haven't rehearsed this episode at all, so it might be a little bit kind of jumbled up, but we're going to get through all of this. I'm not going to provide all the citations on all of this. These are just my own thoughts. If you reach out to me, like send me an email at train, TRAIN, at myboundlessbody.com, or go to our website, www.myboundlessbody.com. There you can fill out the contact information. If you want specific citations, just reach out to me and I'll look them up. I'm not going to go out of my way to do that. It's just way too time consuming to do that. But if you request one for something I'm talking about, just reach out and I will be happy to provide that as like a one-off. I'm going to go through some of these lists. One of the things she talks about that I disagree with is stressing out about food and the elimination of an entire food group and the stress of that act being itself a health detriment. I understand where that's coming from, but I also see a lot of people in the carnivore community that are here because they have health issues to begin with. And if you're in that spot, I don't think that eliminating a quote unquote entire food group, an entire macronutrient, is necessarily more stressful than dealing with something you're already dealing with. So I had questions about that. I wanted to ask her about that. And I don't see many people in the carnivore community that are not doing carnivore because they don't want to be healthier. Like they think they're going to get cancer, or they think their cholesterol is going to go up or whatever. They've tried a lot of different things that brought them to this way of eating, including myself. Like I was always told to tell people to eat the whole grains and the vegetables and all that stuff. And it just, I didn't have an easy time doing it. I couldn't do it myself, and it never seemed to really work. So I had a concern about that, and that was something I wanted to ask her about it. That's how I would respond to that. In her book, this was one that was a big one. She said, eliminating fruits and vegetables, quote, exponentially increases risk of mortality. My question there was, where is that evidence? I have never heard that. I've heard a lot of claims in the health world, and certainly that people who eat more fruits and vegetables are typically healthier. I think by and large, that's probably true, but I've never seen any evidence that says it's because of the fruits and vegetables. People who eat fruits and vegetables are typically the people that are listening to their doctor. They're probably working out. They're probably trying to be healthy to begin with. Those are the people that are probably eating more fruits and vegetables. So is it the fruits and vegetables, or is it all those other things? Maybe they're not drinking as much or smoking or doing crack cocaine. I don't know. I thought that was a little bit strange. And to say that eliminating fruits and vegetables exponentially increases the risk of mortality, that's quite a claim. And again, I'm not aware of that. That was not cited. There were several different studies cited in her book, and we'll go through one or two of them in this discussion, but never heard that. And I wanted to just ask her, like, where's that research? I would love to get my hands on who has said that. If you, the listener, have heard that, please send that in to me. Obviously, that's only going to be based on very, very weak evidence. And to say that eliminating fruits and vegetables exponentially increases your risk of mortality, I don't buy that. Also cited in the book was the need for fiber and the microbiome. I think if you're in the carnivore world, you will immediately have your bullshit meter on as far as that goes. I don't know, again, that that's ever been cited. Now, the microbiome and studies about the microbiome are picking up speed and interest. We're in our infancy of understanding the microbiome. There's been a recent documentary on Netflix called Heck Your Health. It's all about the microbiome and even features things like fecal transplants. I watch every health documentary on Netflix, including your Game Changers and your Cowspiracies and your What the Healths and all these very egregious, poorly done, very well done, but very poor evidence for types of documentaries. People ask me tons of questions about them. You know, recently the twin studies and the blue zones, my absolute favorite to go through and debunk. I watched them all. Like I said, I get tons of questions. I don't agree with a lot of those, again, more egregious ones, but the microbiome one I thought was okay. They do make the claim that having a more diverse microbiome is better for health, or that healthier people have a more diverse microbiome, which is to say, I don't know that one causes the other. Again, what we're understanding about the microbiome is very much in its infancy. And, you know, I don't know if somebody is eating zero fiber. Like I asked her, like, I eat no fiber. What concerns do you have? And it's really vague and nothing really specific. So I don't think fiber is necessary. I don't eat any. I haven't eaten any in over 5 years. I know plenty of carnivores who have not consumed any amount of fiber for a very, very long time. So again, that was one where I don't think the evidence is there to say that a more diverse microbiome is better or worse, especially in the context of somebody who is eating a carnivorous diet where they're really only eating one food. They're eating animal products, mostly like meat, eggs, and dairy. Does having a more diverse microbiome for that context, is that important? I don't know. I don't think so. Okay, this one was interesting. So she cited a study that talked about women and cortisol. And this study, I'm going to look this up, is called Effects of Dietary Consumption on Energy Expenditure During Weight Loss Maintenance. So this is a study that, again, is not looking necessarily at cortisol, although cortisol was something that was measured in the study. I looked up the study. This was cited number 3 in the studies that she cites. I looked this study up to check it out and see what it meant. And there was, from what I saw, a very slight change in cortisol to maybe indicate that some women had an increase in their cortisol when they went on a lower carbohydrate diet versus a higher carbohydrate diet. But the study itself cited a decline in metabolic rate when people went on a high carbohydrate diet relative to people who went on a low carbohydrate diet and did not see their metabolic rate decline. This is the entire reason I'm in the low carbohydrate space. I was using a metabolic cart to measure people's metabolism. And when somebody would eat a higher carbohydrate diet, not only would I see that their bodies would be burning a lot of that carbohydrate and not burning fat, which is what most people wanted to do, would be to burn fat. But I also saw typically that their metabolic rate would be lower than I would have expected. And it was that phenomenon combined with seeing people starting ketogenic diets or starting doing things like intermittent fasting, where their metabolic rates not only were shifted more towards fat burning, and they were actually losing fat, validated on body fat scales, like losing fat, preserving muscle over and over and over and over. I saw this, but also saw that their metabolic rates were much higher than anticipated, meaning their bodies were burning more and more calories when they were consuming more proteins and fats and less carbohydrates. That was what the study was about. It wasn't about cortisol. They measured cortisol, and we can talk about like the method of even measuring cortisol and whether that was particularly valid. At the time of day alone would be very very important to make sure that they were making valid measurements. Cortisol is a hormone that can change during the day depending on your stress levels. So we call it the stress hormone. So there's lots of questions on how that data was collected. But what the study was measuring was metabolic rate. And on the high carbohydrate diet, the metabolic rate had declined. So that was a concern that I had. Okay, another claim that being in ketosis for long term is not a good idea. That is another one I need to see the data on to be able to make that claim. I have not seen that. I know a lot of people in the ketogenic space talk about flexing or metabolic flexibility or, kind of cycling in and out of ketosis and not necessarily staying in ketosis or not. I also know a ton of people who I believe are pretty much in ketosis all the time or consuming a very strict carnivore diet all the time for specific reasons. I have never seen anything that says being in ketosis long term is necessarily a bad thing. So that was going to be another question, if she could provide any type of evidence or a study that measured that. I've not seen that. I don't have experience with that. I don't know what that would look like, but that was another one of my questions, one of my concerns. Okay, another one. It's just such a bunk claim. It's just such a bunk claim. Red meat causing cancer, according to the World Health Organization. Immediately after that, I said, this evidence is extremely problematic and weak. And again, you can look this up, write me, and I'll send you the study, whatever. This came out in about 2015. They claimed that consuming red meat is probably carcinogenic and eating processed meat is definitely carcinogenic. And they put processed meat, I believe, in the same category as things like smoking. I just want to state, according to their own data, smoking will increase your risk of lung cancer by 2,000%, meaning you have a 20-fold chance of getting lung cancer if you are a smoker. In that same data, what they claim for processed meat is that processed meat has an 18% chance of increasing your risk of, I want to say they said colorectal cancer, and put it in the same category as smoking. That's not even double. Where I said smoking was a 2,000% chance, that's 20 times. 20 times. It's huge. We all know that. Where eating processed meat is not even double. It's not even 0.5. It's 1.15 or 1.18, excuse me, 18%. That is minuscule. That's nothing. And again, when you think about where they would have collected the data, would have been epidemiological, meaning they're asking food frequency questionnaires. We talked about earlier the people who are eating more fruits and vegetables. Who are the people eating processed meat? They're probably ignoring the doctor. They might be smoking more. They might be drinking more. They might not be going to the doctor. People who eat red meat in that context are eating burgers with the bun and the fries and the soda. And they don't tell you that. This is not people doing carnivore. These are the people out there that are eating mixed diets and eating pizza and burritos and getting processed meat there. This is insanely problematic. This has been debunked up and down. This is not strong evidence. This never should have been reported on to begin with. This is statistics. Like, just look up rules about what you can report in statistics. This is not statistically viable. You shouldn't even be able to make a claim based on this, yet this headline has been spreading around everywhere. The red meat increases your risk of cancer and is carcinogenic. Therefore, it's ridiculous. There was nothing else like stated with that, so it was something I wanted to talk about. The blue zone, my favorite. We did an entire episode about the blue zones. You know, this is very much a passion of mine. Go back and listen to that. That might be one thing I do tag from this because you'll be able to find a lot of different resources for that. This was something a little bit new to Phoebe. As we were talking offline and going through some of these questions, I was kind of deciding what I was going to ask her, which again, I decided not to ask her any of these questions. She didn't know um, too much about the Blue Zones, even though they made it into her book. She didn't know that, by the way, that like the Blue Zone Project is owned by the Seventh Day Adventist Church. Um, I shared some of the stories from people like Dr. Bill Schindler going to Sardinia, a blue zone, and eating more meat than he normally does, even at home, and he eats a lot of meat. He shared the story of going into every home during the week and every home of a local, and as soon as they get there, they would pull out trays of cheese and meat and all kinds of salami and delicious charcuterie type meat that sounded delicious. And then on the weekend, they were like, "Hey, we're going to eat meat today." And he was like, "The hell are you talking about? I've eaten tons of meat since I've been here. In this supposed blue zone, what do you mean eat meat?" And eat meat to them, then that's the day they were going to have an entire goat or sheep on the grill, and the community was going to get together and have a proper barbecue. That's what they called eating meat. And so the concept of the blue zones, the best way I've heard this described, I believe this was by Dr. Bill Schindler, was it's a bait and switch. They look at these areas where people are living longer and use that to say these people are living so long in part because they're eating plant-based diets. And that is absolutely not true. When you talk to people who either live in the blue zones or visit the blue zones or study the blue zones, Loma Linda is not a blue zone. That's in California. It's been identified as a blue zone so that America would have a quote unquote blue zone to help Dan Buettner sell books about blue zones here in America. That concept is now owned by the Seventh Day Adventist Church, who have been promoting plant-based diets since the 1800s. This is all the Ellen G. White stuff and how John Harvey Kellogg started breakfast cereals to help kind of reduce the natural tendencies and sexual desires, in particular in boys who are touching themselves. That's how cereal came to be. Again, if you've listened to the show, you know all of this. But to say the blue zones are healthy because they're plant-based and they're carbohydrate-based is just really not true. It's just not true. It's a bait and switch, and it's to help push what has ended up being a religious ideology. And yeah, your city can apply to be a blue zone project, and for $6 million, cities like Fort Worth, Texas, can have the Blue Zones Project come in and try to educate and consult essentially about like having walking paths and how to introduce more plant foods to people's diets. So I mean, yeah, gone all up and down all of that. So you can look that up. Like I said, I'll probably tag that episode. Another really problematic thing that I found with a lot of the content was what a lot of people you might have tons of questions with is eating a lot of the plant foods recommended in this book also come with a lot of plant toxins, in particular oxalate. And I asked specifically offline if she had dealt with anybody who had experienced a buildup of too many of these plant toxins, again, in particular oxalate, which your body doesn't really excrete. It has to excrete. There's no way to like really break it down and use it for anything in the body. It just has to like process it out. She did tell me she doesn't have a ton of experience. She didn't necessarily want to talk about it because she hadn't listened to the book Plant Paradox in quite a while, and is again just not exactly the area of expertise. She works with people in short term kind of bursts. Like I said, she told me this offline, so I feel comfortable saying this. She worked with people in her programs in like a 4-week program. So not necessarily what we see, which is a lot of people that have been on plant-based diets, vegan diets, whatever, for a very long time. They're blending up almonds and spinach and beets and all of these things that have really high oxalates that build up and cause a lot of suffering, not only getting into the body, but also getting out of the body. That's not something we addressed in this episode, but something I would be highly, highly concerned of. I think oxalate to me is a problem of building up. So if you have a potato every now and again, I don't think it's necessarily going to be that bad for you. If you are having excessive amounts of those things, like I said, almonds, spinach, chard, beets, dark chocolates, potatoes, those things do accumulate and can cause problems for a lot of people. That was something I wanted to address that we end up not addressing, and not, again, an area of her expertise. And so I let that one slide, but that would be something I would be highly suspicious of. I don't necessarily, again, tell people that they can't have any of that stuff any of the time. The one thing I will say is like spinach in particular seems to be just don't eat spinach. Find a different alternate to spinach. I think spinach is gross anyway. But if you must, like, there's so many other things that you could be eating, other types of foliage that don't have as much oxalate as spinach. I just don't think that's a really good one to have. I'm also highly suspect of almonds, just because in the low carbohydrate space, especially, almond seems to be this like sacred cow of things you can replace your flour with or dairy with, or people just eating like all like tons and tons and tons of almonds that just would not have been a thing in the past. So those are things I pretty much universally tell people they should probably avoid. I don't get too worked up about the other stuff unless they're combining, and it seems like a lot of that stuff is causing problems. Obviously, we've talked to lots of oxalate experts like Sally K. Norton, Monique Attinger, people that have suffered through oxalate poisoning, I would call it, like James Lehman. So we've covered that quite a bit on our show. That would be a definite concern and something I wanted to address here. The last kind of another thing that came up was like types of grains, and she definitely acknowledges that our wheat is not the same as it used to be. Corn is not the same as it used to be. A lot of the grains that we use today and are in the bread and cereal aisle look nothing like the types of grains we would have had as we've evolved. We changed things. We use glyphosate on a lot of these, and she does make recommendations in her book about alternatives to some of those things and different brands and ways to buy things like corn and wheat that are better. I do think that's better. I just don't think it's very practical. Glad she at least covered that in the book. My last two that I wanted to cover, I'm just trying to decide what order to do this in. The second to last I want to say is the practicality. I've been certified as a personal trainer since 2007. I've worked on a metabolic cart since 2007 up until 2020. I've been fully carnivorous now for the last 5 years. I spent most of my career recommending lots of grains, lots of vegetables, lots of fruits, lean proteins, low fat. That's just what you do. That's what we're trained on. I didn't get my nutrition certification until 2017, but that didn't mean that I wasn't thinking about that highly as a personal trainer, talking about it, getting educated about this stuff for a very long time. Practically speaking, the reason I am in the low carbohydrate space is because that approach, I could not get that to work. And I want you to assume that this approach, a higher carbohydrate with the fruits and vegetables and grains, again, lower in fat, lean proteins, assume that it works. I just want you to say that this approach will make somebody be very healthy, practically, on a practical basis, anecdotally, just my own experience. People couldn't do it. Trainers couldn't do it. Nutrition coaches couldn't do it. We were recommending that people consume 9 to 11 servings of vegetables in a day. I'm in this space. I'm trying to do this. I would shop like many times in a grocery store every single week to pick these things up. I couldn't get it to work. I did the smoothies. I did the salads every day. And it wouldn't work for what it said it would. And the people that could do it would try it, and they would do it for a few weeks, maybe a few months, if they were extremely disciplined. But they would find that they were throwing away food. They were spending way too much time and money on things like food prep. Yeah, you could do it on a Monday, but by the time Thursday came along, you're eating your gross food that's going bad. You don't like it anymore. You're starving. Your cravings are going up. You eat the candy bar at work in the break room at 2 p.m. because you're gassed and exhausted and you need to pick me up. And then it's like a free-for-all for the rest of the weekend. Well, this person feels terrible that they've gone on their plan and didn't eat all the food that they spent so much time and money on to begin with. That's, again, like rotting in the fridge. Practically speaking, I could not get this to work for myself or my clients. All of a sudden, people start doing low carb. I'm learning about this slowly. And now it's like working for tons of people, and it's really easy. And practically speaking, it's simple. And they prepare fatty meats and put lots of salt on it. And it seemingly just take the food pyramid, flip it upside down, and it's working. And it works for tons of people. It works for myself and my clients. And like all of a sudden, this magical thing comes along. People lose fat. They feel great. All of these amazing things. What am I going to do? Like, you're paying me as a trainer and a health coach and a nutrition coach to give you the best results. If I give you the standard recommendations, it doesn't work for anybody. I give you really weird recommendations and it seems to work for everybody. Like, I'm going to give you that. Like, I don't care what people eat. I care that people get really good results. I care that people feel really good. So again, on a practical basis, approaching diet like this, I could not get to work. just going to leave that there. If you want to do it and try it and it can work for you, again, assuming that it is the healthiest thing, awesome, go for it. I just, in my experience, it just practically speaking was not something that would work. The very last thing I wanted to bring up, I saved this for last because I do think this is the most important. We often talk about weight loss, and I certainly believe that for weight loss, I think calories are a big part of the equation. I don't think they're the only part of the equation, but I do think that an overconsumption of energy to some extent can help with weight loss. I do see evidence that says a very low fat diet, high carbohydrate, lower fat diet can help with weight loss. I see the evidence. I don't disagree. I also see evidence that says a low carbohydrate, higher fat diet can do that. I don't disagree with that. I think for weight loss, you can do that. I think it was Professor Bart Kay that brought this up in our episode, one of the discussions we've had, that's like, you can choose either approach. You can lose weight either way. One of them is going to make you nutritionally deficient. You're going to be deficient in a lot of different things, and eventually you're going to need to bail out of it or take lots of supplements and hope that that works. The other way, you're not going to be deficient and you can lose weight at the same time. I wanted to ask what the experience was like, not just weight loss. What about mental health? What about reversing insulin resistance? What about reversing diabetes? What about people that have food addiction? What about the people who have epilepsy? What about the people like me that when they were eating carbohydrates and plant foods, they had anxiety and depression? What I'm noticing in the low carbohydrate space, the space that we're in, whether you go full carnivore, what I consider low carbohydrate, which is below 150 grams of carbohydrates a day, is how I think about that, which certainly fits in with what Phoebe is recommending. I want to make that clear. This is not a plant-based book, just with the carbohydrates, including carbohydrates in the day. Anyway, what I notice on this way of eating low carbohydrate is not just about weight loss, not just about fat loss. It is about healing crazy severe issues that really, really help people heal. And the interview that I did right after I did this one was with Sherry Reef. We've interviewed her before, and her going through all of the different things that as she's becoming a health coach and sharing her message with people, and like it's helped her friends who are parents of an autistic child help raise the child in a much better way, or people that their joints are feeling amazing, where people were hardly able to move like her herself. She's walking around in her 30s using a cane. She's now able to do all kinds of stuff and move super well eating a carnivorous diet. She's fixed so many things. She's off of all medications. It helps her husband manage type 1 diabetes on way less insulin. All of these things are reasons why people should be looking at low carbohydrate diets. I don't see that same response with high carbohydrate, low fat diets. I don't see it. I see that people can lose weight. Again, I believe they will be nutritionally deficient. And I think it pretty much stops there as far as benefit, where I'm noticing, again, I mentioned her a million times, more FaceTime for Robin Dobbins, my friend with bipolar, who manages bipolar perfectly well on a carnivore diet and is willing to have very high cholesterol to be able to do that. That's not weight loss anymore. That's not fat loss anymore. That's some serious stuff that I really, really appreciate and I've noticed in this community. And I wanted to say that for last because I think that goes way beyond some of the things that people talk about as far as incorporating, weight loss or fat loss on a low fat, high carbohydrate diet. I don't see the same types of healing, eczema, digestive issues, all that kind of stuff. Whereas I see that every day in the carnivore space and low carbohydrate space. So that is, I think, the most important thing. Well, if you've made it this far, this was longer than I thought it would go. We're 40 minutes in. I really appreciate you listening. Clearly, you haven't turned it off just yet. So I really appreciate you. I try to say it all the time, but I really this is such a passion of mine. I love doing this podcast, and I love all of you out there. I suppose I will get out of this one the way I normally do. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you in your work? Thank you, Casey. This has been such a great opportunity to chat. You're such a great host. Thank you, Casey. You were an amazing guest. Casey, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. But yeah, you're just the best. You look great. You have huge biceps. I love your hair. Like you just are bringing a lot to the table as the host of Boundless Body Radio. And the millions and millions of followers you have out there all really appreciate you and adore you. And they just deservedly so. You're just amazing. But thank you for hosting me. I really appreciate this chat, Casey. You can find me at our website, which is myboundlessbody.com. There, the first thing you're going to see is a book now button. You can click on that, where you can reach out for a free 30-minute consultation to talk about anything related to health and wellness and nutrition. We can talk about things like podcasting or other stuff. We also this summer are doing our summer seminar series all about nutrition. I'm doing that in my neighborhood, but I'm posting everything to YouTube. I want everybody to access it on our website, which is also myboundlessbody.com/seminar, where you can find all of the recordings and any of the resources I have there, including like meal plans, that kind of stuff. So you can enjoy all of that. You'll find our social media links there. So just go to the website, myboundlessbody.com. I really appreciate it. Well, thank you very much, Casey. You were an awesome guest. You continue to be an inspiration to millions and millions of people out there. We're so fortunate that you were able to take time out of your incredibly busy day, changing lives and saving the world to come on our show, Boundless Body Radio today. We really, really appreciate it. Well, thank you very much, Casey. It's such an honor to be here. Well, it's an honor to host you. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.